If you carry a firearm and discharge your weapon in self-defense, you could face hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees and expenses. So carry the protection of CCW Safe, Self-Defense Legal Services membership. Upfront payment of all criminal and civil defense costs with no out-of-pocket for members.
And we are back. I'm Chris Evan, the CEO of Survival Dispatch, joined tonight by my friends Randy Nance, Green Beret extraordinaire, Jeff MD, CIA operative, author extraordinaire, our in-house 007 as well. And tonight we're going to be discussing the high probability of terrorist attacks here in the homeland. Yes, we've covered this topic ad nauseum for the past few years. A lot of the information that we're going to be covering tonight is actually from the Biden admin and the warnings that they put in place. I apologize for that background noise. I've got an Android phone over here I'm testing. I don't know, it just lost its mind on something over there, if you could hear it or not. Yeah. But anyway, before we jump into tonight's topic, we've got the conflicted question of the night. Let me get that up on screen here. So here we go. Someone in your group has gear which would be better used in the hands of another member who's more experienced. The owner doesn't want to lend his equipment because modern society has collapsed and his gear is now irreplaceable. To have his gear in the hands of the person most qualifies to use it, however, would be a great advantage to your group. As the group's leader, do you force the man to lend his equipment in order to give the entire group an advantage, or do you respect his right to his own property? Interesting question. So hang out till the end of this episode and we'll give you our answers to that. We want to hear what your answers are as well. Feel free to put them in the live chat, whatever platform you're watching us on. This is going out to 9 platforms. Put it in the comment section down below. Put it on our Substack. You can even email us at support@survivaldispatch.com. So kicking off tonight, I want to briefly mention and then love to hear what you all have to say. We have been predicting for several years multiple different attack vectors, one of them being what happened in Idaho last night. So you get a bad guy, he puts a call in that requests first responders. In this particular case, it was firemen, and then ambushes them and shoots them. And that's probably going to happen more and more often, especially since last night's got so much news coverage. We'll end up with copycats and whatnot. This video was posted last night by Tony Lane a few hours after this broke out. The news broke, pardon me. It's a minute and 47 seconds. I probably won't play the whole video, but I'm going to play enough that we get the gist of it. Come to you first, Randy, for your comments, and then Jeff. This ties in, though, to the multiple different ways that we're at risk of terrorist attack.
Pictures out of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. We have been following developments throughout the day of firefighters being ambushed when responding to a call for a brush fire in a local park there. And you're seeing now, we're told, is a procession coming out of that park. We saw at least one vehicle that appeared to be a hearse. You see people there, of course, waving flags, standing, lining the route there. There had been, we were told a number of hours ago, an active shooter who they believe is on the loose. We do know at this hour that a body was found on the mountain, a firearm found nearby. It is not clear whether that was a suspect. But just to recap of how we got to this moment, that there is now this procession leaving the park, all of these law enforcement vehicles, as you can see. You see the fire trucks there as well. And again, we saw just a short moment ago what appeared to be at least one hearse. A little after 1 o'clock local time, there was a call of a brush fire. Firefighters responded, and then another call came in at 2 o'clock of firefighters reporting that shots had been fired. 2 firefighters we're told were killed. A third, according to a firefighters union, is in the hospital now in surgery. The sheriff, just within the last couple of hours, holding an initial press conference confirming those 2 deaths, saying it was unknown whether there would be other casualties or civilians who could be stuck on the mountain. And at that time,
so that video was from last night. We have some additional information, of course, since then. The shooter was found with what appears to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound, committed suicide. But the point of it is again, we've mentioned this attack vector in the past of false phone calls and then the ambushing first responders. Randy, what were your thoughts when you heard this yesterday?
Well, the first thing I thought was, I wonder who the shooter is. And, and the reason I wondered why is because when something like this happens, this is out of the normal, right? So it seems to me that I wonder if somebody, we noticed that the protesters in LA, the rioters, seem to be trained more than they were, even though they seemed trained in 2020. Now they've picked up more tactics, right? They have more tools in their toolkit. This is the same thing. This isn't normal for somebody to just think this up. And then it made me wonder if somebody didn't, kind of either put him up to it or train him to tell him this was where you want to do this, or this is happening. And, I've seen some pictures. I don't know if the guy's transgender or if he has some issues or if he's an illegal alien. I don't know any of that, but I do know that it seems weird that he would do it this way. We have been talking about it, but as we know, that's not normal because this will be like the first event. We've had some others with domestic violence issues, but nothing, somebody actually brought them in as, basically into an ambush. And so I'm curious to see, again, what I don't like is in some of these instances, we've noticed all of a sudden they have all the information in like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Nothing on this one. And I don't like when it ends like this, that we didn't get to see them kill themselves. Did they really do it? Or I just don't like it. Seems too clean and neat in the end, but it very well could be exactly what happened.
Yeah, it's like everything else these days in the news cycle. It's hard to determine what's real, what's not real, what's a psyop, what's not a psyop. I do like the comments from the sheriff there last night or yesterday afternoon, I should say, before they got this guy. And he basically said, if you get a shot on this guy, take it, whether you're a first responder or private citizen. That was a very Florida-like thing to say. Jeff, what were your thoughts on this attack yesterday?
Well, I know that there had been like some skinhead Aryan Nation camp or something in that area that had gotten shut down a decade ago or more. And the buildings that were still there, the local fire department would burn down and then put out for training purposes. And I've seen that before. A lot of places, even on, military bases where I've worked and lived, they would old houses that needed to be torn down. They would just burn them up so the fire department could practice. But the more I read, especially once they got the guy and he was only 20, this may have been, and there's been other times where people would call in a firemen show up and they shoot at them. Normally happens in cities, urban, inner city stuff. But it may have been essentially suicide by cop. And the reason he calls in a fire first because he's some bloodlust psycho who wants to get a couple kills in before someone puts a bullet through his head. Yeah. You call in the cops, you may get the first one, but the other one's going to return fire. Firemen aren't going to do that.
Yeah. When I heard he was 20 years old, where my mind went, as we got a handful of details on him, it kind of went where Randy's mind went. And I was thinking to myself, the John Brown Gun Club is not too far, from Idaho, just over the state line. And they've been specifically teaching, call it unconventional tactics. It's the word of the day. I'll explain to the audience later why it's the word of the day. But it crossed my mind that he could have also been an Antifa, type guy like Randy's discussing. And they are, let's say, more polished this time around than they were in 2020 and all of these peaceful protests. So we'll keep monitoring it, see what happens. But it's got to be brutal to be a fireman thinking that you could get a call to somewhere where there's actually a fire and then get out of the fire truck and be shot on the spot, essentially. That's rather unsettling. No matter who you are, that's unsettling. Anyway,
probably.
Yeah.
That's what every fireman in the country is thinking right now.
Yeah.
No question. No question.
So is his wife.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, a lot of the information that we're going to cover tonight, it came from the Department of Homeland Security during the Biden administration. So I just want to be really clear that, you know, we're not trying to fear monger. We never try to fear monger. As a matter of fact, we tell people to prep for the most likely thing to happen in your geography. For us in the Southeast, it would be hurricanes, for example. But there is so much intel out there, open source and otherwise, indicating that this next terrorist attack that we see on the homeland is probably going to be pretty horrendous. And the better prepared all of us are up front, and that starts with knowledge, which is really the purpose of Survival Dispatch News, the better. So the first, call it segment for tonight that we're going to discuss is the threat landscape. So that would be the official assessment from DHS. And they released an assessment last year, and it's very long and very wordy. And here it is. And if you go over to our Substack, so survivaldispatchnews.com, there's a written article every day called the SITREP, the Situation Report, that goes with our broadcast each evening. The SITREP itself is free for everybody. If you sign up for a free account, you get that. Plus, you get our weekly watch guide. And paid members get all of the URLs, all of the links where we gathered the information for that night's particular episode. So with that being said, the first one I want to touch on is the Iranians escalating their cyber and terror threats. So the National Terrorism Advisory System issued a bulletin on June 22nd. So what's that, 8 days ago, warning that the ongoing Iran conflict, and I know we have a ceasefire in place now, but it's causing a heightened threat environment in the U.S. here. You know, and by the way, we had a fatwa issued over the weekend, which is basically Iranian Ayatollahs saying assassinate Donald Trump, assassinate Benjamin Netanyahu. But the bulletin that was put out 8 days ago specifically notes that Iran has a longstanding commitment to target U.S. government officials it views as responsible for the death of an Iranian military commander killed January 2020, which is Soleimani, of course. And the bulletin I'm referring to is right here. So, summary of the threat to the United States, June 22nd, 2025. But the gist of that bulletin is really the cyber warfare piece to this, the cyber attacks. There were reports released last year by the DHS that basically said that the Chinese were bragging that they had access to all of our major infrastructure. Now, don't quote me on this number, but I want to say that the Chinese were bragging that they had access to 31 pieces of our infrastructure. And the Chinese, the Iranians, and North Koreans have teamed up together on these cyber attacks. Jeff, I'm going to go to you first, just because you're an engineer and you spoke to this topic in the past before. Give us some examples of where the intel leads as far as what cyber attacks we're vulnerable to and what the result of those cyber attacks would be.
Well, we've seen it in the past, like when the cell network goes down in a region or across the country. But if you really want to screw up the country, well, one, you take down comms, which they've done before. The other thing you do is you take down the grid, and you don't have to use kinetic. You can get into the SCADA systems, which is the supervisory control and data acquisition systems, which run everything. They run the power grid, they run the pipelines, they run the gas pipelines, they run the water systems, and they're just big computer systems, and you can go in there if you've got access to them, and you can go in there and you can turn off a pump, you can close a valve, you can open a breaker on a 400 kilowatt or kilovolt line, and create massive grid instability, which will trip breakers, and you'll have a cascading blackout. You can shut down gasoline pipelines. We saw that with the Continental Line. Someone hacked it. You can turn off valves. I mean, everything that makes our life function is computerized now. So if you get into that computer network or that computer grid, or get into any one of them, you can cause havoc. And the Iranians are probably doing the same thing. We did it to them. That was Stuxnet. which is not the real name, by the way. That was what the hackers gave it. It was really called Olympic Games. And they learned from that. And they have a copy of that software because they found it on their systems once they knew what they were looking for. And they could turn around and reverse engineer it and use it on us. And if I was Iran, that's what I would do, because it gives, one, you don't have nothing kinetic. And number two, plausible deniability. Hey, your system went down. Don't look at me, man. I didn't do it. Because, they access it through VPNs and they bounce it off of servers in Europe and South America. So it makes it damn near impossible to trace where it really came from. And they could do it from a cell in Europe. So it looked like it came from Germany.
Yeah, I think the worst part of the cyber attacks, to be honest with you, coming from high tech and being a systems and network engineer in a former life, is that a lot of these systems you're referring to, the SCADA systems, technically it's against the law to connect those to the internet at large. They're supposed to be restricted to, local area network access, but people get lazy. They open them up. A lot of them have default passwords in place. It's not a big task to break into them.
No.
And then once somebody breaks into these networks, just so people who are not in the tech industry understand this, it's really easy to open up additional back doors that nobody knows anything about. And you have to be pretty astute to find them and pick up on them. And there's lots of ways for penetrating firewalls with these types of Trojan horses, essentially. Go ahead, Jeff. If you had something.
No, the other thing too is, even if the SCADA system is not connected to the internet, I can guarantee you somewhere it's connected to another computer that is connected to the internet. Yeah. Not direct, but indirect.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Randy, is there anything you want to add on the topic of cyber attacks?
I was just going to say that, really, if people don't think that China doesn't have access to all our stuff, I mean, they've been building our electronics for how many decades now? At least since the mid 90s, right? Or somewhere in there. So the fact, I mean, it's a fact. If you don't think that they don't have a little back door into your phone because they built this thing in China, just like everything else. And then we look at the 9 substations, those high, the ones we've been talking about. That's right. They're built in China. You know what I mean? So what else, whether it's the water, all these other things, and of course the internet and Iran, I would probably do the same thing that Jeff mentioned. I mean, I'm sure they probably have, because that wasn't easy to, they found it. And just like you said, it's very hard to prove where that actually came from, the way that was inserted. So that is where we're most vulnerable. And then I just think all this stuff's exposed. So I would expect it.
Yeah. So we've got a ton of ground to cover tonight, and I'm going to try my best to keep us on schedule. So if we seem like we've glossed over something, again, the links to everything are on our Substack, survivaldispatchnews.com. So this is on govtech.com, by the way. And essentially, this author of this report lays out, the Chinese government, the Russian government, North Korean government, the Iranian government. Russia does cooperate with some of these guys, but it's really the triad of China, North Korea, and Iran as far as foreign entities working together. But you have to balance this against the fact, and it was just proven with the initial tariffs on China, their economy is so dependent on us that China doesn't want to knock us out. China wants to make us less competitive and weaker, but they don't want to take away the opportunity to sell, goods into the American market. But it's pretty extensive as far as the access they have, so extensive that CISA, which falls under the DSA as well, and CISA.gov. So CISA.gov, you can find all this information. They actually offer security consulting now to private businesses to help fortify and harden their networks against cyber attacks. So this particular page on the CISA website, and I'll scroll up so you can see nation state threats. And anybody who's really interested in this, I'll throw the link in the chat. I think it goes out to 8 of the 9 platforms we're broadcasting to. So if you're a private business owner, or you're somebody mid-tier management and up in private industry. The link that I just sent you, you can actually go to it and you can request an assessment from them on what your current vulnerability level is. And they'll come back and tell you how you can mitigate some of these risks, as well as tell you anything malicious that they find. So a lot of times what happens, and we're going to move on fairly quickly from here, but a lot of times what happens is systems are compromised, and the people who've compromised it don't do anything right away. They just keep that in their back pocket. So when the time comes that they stand something to gain, that's when they leverage that stuff. So in the meantime, you have no activity. So there's nothing happening that trips any red flags, and nobody sees that they've been compromised until it's too late, essentially. So CISA will help with that. And it's just, I think that's interesting that the government is now that concerned about it, that they're actually going to help people with this. So anyway, moving on from there, there was this report here, securing our borders, was the day that Donald Trump was sworn into office. And of course, he's locked down the border in multiple different ways. But one of the biggest ways, as we've seen, is to limit the people coming across the border. Kind of like that guy who said, you don't know who I am, but you're going to know who I am. And the last I heard, we have eyes on him. He's in the DFW area, so Randy's area. But suffice it to say, we have a whole bunch of people now against us, both externally and internally, thanks to the border being open for all those years. So it's locked down now, but the door was left open for so long. We're vulnerable, and here's the proof behind it right here. So CBP, Border Patrol enforcement actions. I've shown this chart before, and this shows what's happened as far as each year over year, right? So CBP enforcement actions, you've got 526,000 in 2017. Then all of a sudden, look at this, we're 1.9 million year 21, 2.7 million 22. Yeah, 3.2 million 23, 2.9 million. And for financial year 2025 up to May, we're at 590,000. So it's the lowest it's been since 2017. And it's good progress. We're doing a good job of shutting the border down. But Randy, give me your thoughts on, all of the people we let in. We tried for the past 4 years to educate people and show them pictures that we're not just talking people coming from third world countries who were trying to make a better life for themselves. There's 190 some odd countries in the world, 194 maybe. And I want to say 191 of them were represented by people walking across the border into our country. Randy, then Jeff, if you want to add anything to the threat that's already here.
Well, we just have to realize, if one of our greatest enemies, and certainly one of the strongest, if not the strongest ever, all of a sudden had this big vulnerability, they just hike their skirt up and let everybody on in. Of course, that's exactly what's going to happen. These people are not stupid. And, and they are very strategic. They try to be as smart as they possibly can. And, we already know the fact that Hamas is here. We know other cells are here. We know there are Chinese here, as we've spoken many times. If there's 30 to 50 Chinese men here, those people didn't just leave China on their own and get on out of there and make their way here. And had they would have probably come across the Pacific, which would have been much shorter, instead of going all where, however they went. But the truth is, you have to realize, basically they let everybody walk in the door and didn't stop anybody for any reason. And even the ones they checked that had any kind of criminal fit, didn't matter. They just let them in. So yes, there are people here that are here to do us harm. And now, yes, glad we got the door shut now, but it's a little too late we let all these other folks in. So we're going to have to deal with that at some point.
So since I acquired Survival Dispatch, I've been, I've worked really, really hard not to be the sky is falling type of channel and news outlet. And so I like to back everything up with some sort of statistics. So if you have a look at this is June 24th. That's 6 days ago. 6 days ago, ICE arrested 11 Iranian nationals illegal in the U.S. So not this weekend, but the weekend before. And I'll just
I think there's more since, correct? We've arrested some more since.
I think the next article actually we have queued up is that there's another 30 or something like that.
Okay.
But just here's like the bluff on this, the bottom line up front. So criminally illegal aliens arrested included an individual with admitted ties to Hezbollah, known or suspected terrorist, and an alleged former sniper for the Iranian army. That last part's really interesting because now there have been 2 Iranian snipers taken into custody in the past week, which that's it boggles the mind. But anyway, let me get this update out of the way. So U.S. Immigration Customs Enforcement arrested 11 Iranian nationals illegally in the United States over the weekend. So again, this is the previous weekend. ICE also arrested a U.S. citizen who threatened to kill ICE law enforcement while harboring an illegal alien from Iran. The weekend arrests reflect the Department of Homeland Security's commitment to keeping known and suspected terrorists out of American communities. Under Secretary Noem, DHS has been full throttle on identifying and arresting known or suspected terrorists and violent extremists that illegally entered this country, came through Biden's fraudulent parole programs or otherwise, said DHS Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin. We've been saying we are getting the worst of the worst out, and we are. We don't wait until a military operation to execute. We proactively deliver on President Trump's mandate to secure the homeland. So the balance of this article, this guy here is one of the snipers, Ribvar Karimi, and in Alabama of all places. And he was an Iranian army sniper from 2018 to 2021. Then he came here on a K-1 visa, which is aliens who are engaged to be married to American citizens. And that was granted October 2024, but the list goes on. Again, this particular update from the DHS was 11 Iranians. And then again, like Randy alluded to, there's another list coming up here as well. Jeff, back to the border briefly on all the different people who essentially just walked across the open border. In your estimation as an intel guy, give me the low range, because I asked this question to JJ Carroll and it blows me away at the size of the number, but give me the low end of the number of potential terrorists who crossed the border during the 4 years that Mayorkas and Biden opened the border. You're on mute, Jeff.
Potential could be anybody from anywhere, but you got to look at what we used to call special interest aliens, which are the ones from countries with terrorist history. You
Special interest.
Yeah, you look at Syria, you look at Pakistan, you look at India, you look at Iraq, or not India. You look at Pakistan, you look at Iraq, you look at countries that are unstable and have a propensity towards terrorist activities. Palestinians would fit in that category, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
So, and Jordanians could as well if they're Palestinian Jordanians. There's all, hell, the Palestinian Jordanians tried to overthrow their government back in the 70s. So there's no telling. These are not guys coming up from Mexico because they want to work in the agriculture industry seasonally. It takes a lot of effort to get here from the Middle East. And do they want to come here because they want to make money? Yeah, a lot of them probably do. But where better to hide a terrorist than in just a wave of humanity crossing a border? Yep. If 100,000 people cross the border and there's one terrorist in it, that's one too many. Yep. If I was a terrorist, that's what I would do.
Yeah, it's one who should have never been here. And by the way, our friend Kevin Ramsey's with us tonight. He's been sick and he's hopefully on the mend now. It's good to see Kevin back again, though. Yeah. So moving on, like just you've got state-sponsored operations. Like Jeff, let me ask you this question: what's the process for a Chinese person who wants to leave mainland China?
Well, you've got to get what's essentially an exit visa. And in the day, the Russians had the same thing. They wouldn't issue. You don't just go down to the passport office in Beijing and get a passport.
Yeah.
To apply for a passport, here anybody can apply for a passport. You go to the post office, apply for a passport. Over there, if you apply for a passport, you've got to basically tell them, okay, I need a passport. This is why I need it. I've got this trip to visit family or for business or whatever. You don't say, yeah, I just want to go visit America. Yeah, probably not. If you're military, definitely not. If you're active duty military, hell no. So, yeah, they control everything. Now, if you sneak out, say you cross the border into Vietnam or something like that, well, now you're an illegal alien in Vietnam. The Vietnamese may not want to. So it's not that easy. Now, as they've become more affluent over the years, they do have more tourism. I was in Paris with my son and wife several years ago. Yeah, it was full of Chinese. And, they're not all there. The little old ladies and old men, they're not there to spy on the French. They've got money and now they want to go visit Europe. But that's a relatively new development. And it's expensive to travel, and most Chinese can't afford it.
Yeah, and thank you for making the point. So for our audience, I just wanted Jeff to drive the point home that people don't just wake up and say, well, I think I'll go travel the world when they're Chinese nationals. And if you don't believe us, it's really, really easy to find a ton of pictures, confirmed pictures and news reports of Chinese nationals walking across our southern border. And my wife is fond of the saying, for every rat that you see, there's 1,000 that you don't. And that heavily applies to the border. And JJ Carroll backed us up on that one as well. But here's an interesting twist. So we have discussed how it's open source intel now that there were several hundred Hezbollah terror cells in America in the 1990s that were being tracked by our intelligence agencies and law enforcement. And some of those terror cells were a couple individuals up to maybe 10 or 12 individuals. But there's another angle to this that's pretty scary, and that's the evolving threat of lone wolf terrorism in Western countries. And so according to the latest Global Terrorism Index for 2025, a staggering 93% of all fatal terrorist attacks in the West are now committed by lone wolf actors over the course of the past 5 years. So, Jeff, my understanding is that when like a terrorist cell sets up shop here, they know of the people in their cell, but they don't know of any other cells. But this is a totally different deal where you have individuals who think that they're on a holy mission essentially and are operating completely independent of everybody else. My question for you and Randy, because Randy has done a fair bit of work as a Green Beret in this field as well. What are the chances of the Iranians activating a whole bunch of lone wolves simultaneously? Not sleeper cells, we've covered that one ad nauseum, but lone wolves just saying, okay, you're going to do this on this day, and they coordinate them all without them knowing that they're even coordinated. What are the chances of something like that unfolding? Jeff first, and then Randy.
Well, it's actually pretty good. I mean, if the thing about a lone wolf is, the old line, the only way for 3 people to keep a secret is if 2 of them are dead. But if you have a lone wolf, he's the only one that has to keep the secret. And if he gets sent over here and they go, you just live your life, do whatever you want to do. However, if you get this code, you're supposed to go out and attack something. He may have a target in advance, or they may say, hit any target in this category, a school, a mall, or something like that. And that's I don't want to say the easiest, but it's the safest for the person pulling the strings. But you're right about a cell. The idea is a cell, they only know about each other. There could be another cell operating a block away and they don't know about it.
Yeah.
That way they can't betray it. We do the same thing in espionage. If you have an agent network, you may have a network of agents, and there's a principal agent who's in charge of all of them. He knows who all the agents are. None of the agents know. They might know who their principal is. They probably don't know his real name or her real name, but they don't know about any of the other agents because it's all compartmentation. And you can wrap up one, and he may rat out the principal agent, but he doesn't know his real name. So that alias persona just disappears.
So, Randy, before I come to you on this, let me just read off the radicalization in the digital age from this. So, one of the most concerning aspects of modern lone wolf terrorism is the speed at which radicalization occurs. In 2002, it took an average of 16 months for an individual to move from exposure to extremist material to executing an attack. By 2015, this period had shrunk by over 40%. Today, in some cases, radicalization happens in mere weeks. The acceleration of this process is largely due to digital platforms where extremist networks exploit algorithms to expose vulnerable individuals to radical content. Social media and encrypted messaging apps serve as incubators for extreme ideologies, enabling self-radicalization without the need for direct in-person recruitment. This development has made it increasingly challenging for law enforcement to identify and intervene before attacks occur. So we've been saying for 3 years now in Survival Dispatch News that these terrorists will continue to use low-tech options to commit terrorist acts like driving a vehicle into a crowd. The guy in New Orleans on January the 1st of this year who did that, it appears that there were some connections to other parties. There were IEDs found there. But at the end of the day, one guy who was born and raised in America and radicalized online drove a truck through a crowd of people on New Year's Eve and killed a bunch of people. It just doesn't take anywhere near the effort that it used to for the terrorists to recruit people and have things like this happen. Any comments in general, Randy, as far as the lone wolves are concerned before we move on from that topic?
Yeah, well, I would say look at Cooks, right? He was a lone wolf. Probably didn't happen. It probably didn't take very long. As well, we don't really know because really nothing come out, but we know he just got out of high school. And I would go back to the other statistic where it talked about in the West how many are now lone wolves. Well, you look at a lot of those are school shootings and some other things, and I truly believe that somebody's making that happen, right? These kids didn't just wake up and do that one day, whether it's FBI, whether it's Al Qaeda, whoever it is, somebody got to these folks because they're at risk. You look at them, they all fit a certain stereotype. Stereotypes are there for a reason, as mentioned before, but that's what I think, to somebody, and they've gotten better at it. It's no different than when I made the comparison to the rioters in 2020 and now in 2024, they seem to have a few more tools in their toolkit than they had in 2020. And we thought they were pretty skilled in 2020. So I think it's a learning process that they've learned how to do it much faster. And you look at where society, even our country, since basically 2016 and the heightened fever everybody's at and everybody's at odds, I think that helps cook that up a little bit, right? Because you're already half there. Most people are already upset and halfway there. They just have to finish the process.
So you mentioned Matthew Crooks, and I can't believe that we're coming up on a year. That was July 13th last year, and we know virtually nothing about that kid. He had multiple cell phones. He had offshore bank accounts. He supposedly had no social media presence. So on the surface, he may appear to be a lone wolf, but there's a lot of suspicious stuff that we don't have answers to. It's kind of discouraging, to be honest with you, that we don't have answers and they're hiding that from us. But let me just read a few things off for y'all. So this is called the 2025 surge, and DHS is using that term. FBI is using it as well. In 2024 alone, terrorist incidents in the West surged to 52. A sharp increase from 32 the previous year. 7 Western countries, Germany, the US, France, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and Sweden, now rank among the top 50 nations on the Global Terrorism Index for 2025. The challenge of detection is the next piece that we're going to get into. And this, I'm reading a quote here. Here's what makes lone wolf terrorists so dangerous. They work alone, making tracking extremely challenging. As the FBI notes, there are no communications between members of a group to discover and interrupt their planning. That's pretty crazy stuff when you think about that. So this was a study done here. As you can see, it's mentioned that it's the UK here, but I've already read off the initial part to it, but here's the key findings. These are the people who track, the terrorist attacks in Western countries. So there's a long list of discoveries here. I won't bore you with them all, but Jeff, educate me here. What's the Sahel region? Because they say that's the terrorism's epicenter, accounting for half of all global terrorism threats and deaths. Sahel region. Where is that, and what does that mean to you?
I believe they're referring to Mali, Niger, southern Chad, that area. I'm not sure. I can look real quick.
I didn't mean to spring that on you.
Yeah, you did.
No, actually, I didn't. But
yeah, you did. I don't believe you.
I've never heard that term before, but just a quick search on AI here says the Sahel is a semi-arid region of Africa stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to the Red Sea, forming a transitional belt between the Sahara Desert to the north and the more fertile savannas to the south. It spans parts of countries, including, you mentioned this, Senegal, Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Chad, Sudan, and Eritrea. Characterized by grasslands, savannas, and shrublands, it has a hot, dry climate with a short rainy season, blah, 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 blah. I didn't know this either. So the area was kind of made famous by Boko Haram, which is a terrorist group.
Yeah.
So I have never heard of the term the Sahel region, so I'm surprised that key findings, that's like the epicenter of terrorism. And going on from there, Islamic State expands its operation to 22 countries and remains the deadliest organization, causing 1,805 deaths last year, with 71% of its activity being in Syria and the DRC. Is that the Dominican Republic?
DRC?
Yeah.
Democratic Republic of Congo.
Pardon me. Okay. There's another one. TTP emerged as the fastest growing terrorist group, 90% increase in attributed deaths. Deaths in sub-Saharan Africa, excluding the Sahel, are now at their lowest since 2016. Terrorist attacks jumped by 63% in the West. Blah, blah, blah. What do you make of this basically the epicenter being Africa, North Africa, Jeff? What's fueling it in that area?
Because their governments are, for the most part, dysfunctional. So, I mean, if you look at the Middle East, you look at the Saudi Peninsula, you've got Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait. These are relatively modern, affluent countries, and where you recruit terrorists from are people who are impoverished for the most part. They have nothing to lose and everything to gain. So, if you go to a guy who's worth $250,000 or he makes $150,000 a year, you say, "Hey, go kill yourself." He's like, "Yeah, go screw you, man. I like my life." But you got some guy who's been living in a mud hut, drinks water from a dirty well. Not to put it too crudely, he don't have much to lose. So it's fertile grounds for recruiting people, and they're uneducated. And most of their education comes in the form of reading the Quran, if they can even read, having the Quran read to them. So that's everything to them. And they're just sheltered people and very easy to manipulate.
That's interesting, because let me counterbalance this with this myth that middle-aged white males are the most significant terrorist threat to America, that the Biden admin tried to ram down everybody's throat in the FBI for 4 years. Keith Graves has regaled us with stories of the FBI coming into conferences that he was training people in drug and gang interdiction, and people standing up, like law enforcement agents standing up, officers, I should say, while the FBI is trying to tell them that middle-aged white guys are the problem. And they were describing things like, having Gadsden flags and those sort of things. And there was one guy in a conference that Keith was teaching at who stood up and he held his laptop up, and every single thing that the FBI said was an indicator of a middle-aged white male terrorist, this guy had on his laptop. And he said, well, I've been in law enforcement for ever many years, and apparently I'm the number one threat. And it's the only reason I brought up this page. Randy, you're a Green Beret. You served our country. You lost a leg in Iraq getting blown up. What is your take on that 4-year disgusting period of them saying that you and I and the rest of us were the number one threat to this country? Seriously?
Well, it kind of goes with everything they said. Now you can't listen to any of those institutions, most of the federal agencies, and definitely not the news, because they're just not telling you the truth. They're telling you the exact opposite or worse. Yeah, it was, to me, I felt the same way. I felt how disrespectful, for one. And then just the gall to be able for them to get on national TV or in any of those meetings and stand up with a straight face and say that is just ridiculous. As you were pointing out some of the things on that last page, I noticed down at the bottom was one of them that more of them were 18 years or under, and that's the way it is. It doesn't matter, our crime here in any of the major cities, it's mostly kids that are in their teenage years. And it doesn't matter which neighborhood it is. It was the same thing overseas. Now, when we first kicked off Afghanistan, we kicked off Iraq, and I can't speak a whole lot about Afghanistan, but certainly Iraq, they were all men. But when I came back after going through the Q course, now everybody out at night and putting all the IEDs and doing all the bad stuff were kids that were 18 years old or even younger, some. And that's predominantly, now we were going after some of the bigger fish. So those was guys, but everybody working for them and any of them that were on the street were kids, man. And, because they're also very malleable, as we all know, they're very easy to talk and to do something. And then if you give them something that they think is, they can be a part of something bigger than themselves, that there's some sort of payoff at the end, it's going to, no matter what they do, it's all going to be good in the end. Like, let's say Cooks. Let's just take him, for example. We don't really know, but we can speculate. They probably told this guy he was going to be a hero, right? To some degree. You're going to be a hero when you get this done. And now they think that they've got this, just like the conflicted question we talked the other day, right? Now the guy that wants to commit suicide, we need to give him, certainly since his family is not, able to help and it's not changing his mind, we need to give him a job that only he can do, right? So that's kind of how it goes with these terrorists, because now as they develop these kids think this is a mission from God that only they can do, and they're more than happy to go carry it out.
So moving along with the top terrorist threat theme, it's interesting that as soon as Donald Trump's admin got back in, the definition of a terrorist reverted to a realistic explanation, right? It's not, if middle-aged white guys were the most significant threat to America, I got news for you. You would know, because we're by far the largest group of men and men with guns. And I don't know a single radicalized person who's a WASP. Not one who's even remotely hinted at it, sort of thing. And I don't know a single person who's ever done any heinous act like burn crosses on people's lawns and wearing a bed sheet and all of that crap. So Boulder, just the way it was reported on, is completely different over the course of barely a year here. So Boulder terror attack suspect showed signs of growing lone wolf radicalization, says former FBI supervisor. Mohammed Solomon's alleged fire assault injuries. Golly, that's a badly written sentence. I can't read that. So he was Egyptian born, essentially. Let's just say that. And this was the Molotov cocktails, firebombing, whatever you want to call it, at an event, a Jewish event in Boulder, Colorado. And
one of his victims died today.
Say that again, Jeff.
One of his victims died today.
Oh, really?
Interesting.
Yeah, the old lady. So he'll be facing capital murder charges.
Yep.
Good. So essentially 45 years old. He used homemade incendiary devices. He lit 8 people on fire in Boulder. He was advocating for Hamas and Gaza and anti-Israel. And before somebody comes out of the woodwork and says that we're pro-Israel or anything like that, we're not pro any of these guys. They've been fighting since Christ was a cowboy. And honestly, I just assume that we have nothing to do with them. I don't support the Israelis, Hamas, Gaza, any of these sides. I think they're all a bunch of sick people, to be quite frank. They've all done very heinous things to each other. But the reason I mention this is, again, because this kind of summarizes it right here. Threat snapshot. House Homeland releases updated terror threat snapshot assessment in the wake of Boulder and DC terrorist attacks. And it's back to a sane profile. And anybody who says profiling doesn't work, I've mentioned this before, and I'm just going to cover it really quickly. If you pull into an airport in Israel where they've never had a commercial jetliner taken hostage, there will be somebody who greets you, whether you're on a bus, car, or otherwise, and they will ask you what's your name and what's your destination. And that trips a lot of bad guys up. Then you're going to go inside. You can't check in online. You're going to get your boarding pass and check a bag if you have a bag at the counter. It's not a ticket person per se. It's somebody who's been trained in observing your actions, how you answer questions. They're trained to ask very specific questions. Meanwhile, you have a whole bunch of undercover guys wandering around the airport, profiling everybody who's in there. The last time I saw a number quoted, from the time that you got on-prem to the time you got to your gate, was approximately 20 minutes on average in Israeli airports. And why is that? Because they profile. My 80-year-old mother is not the threat. Making her take her shoes off and, patting her down and stuff is security theater. It's not a real thing. So I'll end on this point. I'll just say that I'm thankful to see that the definition of a terrorist is back to what it should be. You don't see guys coming over here from Western European countries, like Germans and French and British, committing terrorist acts on American soil against Americans. It's Muslims who hate our guts. I don't know if you two want to add anything to that before we move on or not. Obviously, it's highly political, is what it is. If it walks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. But
the only thing I wanted to point out real quick is just, again, how the bias of the media, like when that guy came out, it was reported he was saying, like Allah Akbar, and there was no doubt he said some things, but they didn't want to admit that on the news, and they still really haven't. You know what I mean? But then when it came to the 2 state lawmakers that were shot, one died, her and her husband, then they had a perfect story all lined out. You go back to Cooks, nothing. So it's just funny how that keeps happening in the media. And I just want to point that out.
No, I appreciate that. Next, couple of tabs are out of order. This should have been earlier when we were discussing the cyber attacks. But again, the ODNI 2025 threat assessment specifically mentions Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea targeting and having access to our systems. But here's one that's not out of order, and this is from 5 days ago. Iranian-backed hackers go to work after U.S. strikes. Hackers backing Iran have targeted U.S. banks, defense contractors, and oil industry companies following American strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. So the way I look at the Iranians, and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, but they don't negotiate in good faith. They will smile to your face while stabbing you in the back. So while we have this ceasefire, and I'm glad there's a ceasefire, I'm not unhappy about that, but I don't trust them as far as I can throw them. And I think that they're still actively working against us, and they would love to kill Donald Trump, as they've said with their fatwa. And if they have the ability to take down anything American, I'm pretty sure they're going to do it, ceasefire or not. What are your thoughts on the Iranians as far as them being trustworthy in any of this? I don't think they are.
No, I don't trust the Iranians as far as I can throw them. this is not a slight on Iranians in general. This is just the mullahs and the people in charge. They're radical Islamists, and if you're a radical Islamist, it's okay to screw over an infidel. And so you can lie to an infidel, and to them, it's not really lying. It's not dishonorable. It's not shameful because they're infidels,
So just let me make sure I understand this correctly. Are you saying that that's codified in the Quran?
I don't know that.
Yes.
It may be, but I know you can get away with treating infidels completely different than you do Muslims. It's just like in the Quran, it says it's okay to allow other children of the book, which are Christians and Jews, to live in your community, but they have to pay a special tax. There's a tax that applies to Christians and Jews that don't apply to Muslims. They have all sorts of laws that, it's against the law to kill a fellow Muslim, but if you kill an infidel, it's just frowned on. I don't trust them as far as I can throw.
Fair enough. I don't know if you want to add anything to that or not, Randy.
I was just going to say what I learned. It's definitely in the Quran. I couldn't tell you where it is, but that's what we were told at group. You know what I mean? And that's what I've learned throughout the years. Again, I've never read the Quran, never even held one actually, and I won't. But I do know that supposedly, again, because I can't deny it that or confirm that I've seen it myself, but that's what I've been told, that is actually in the Quran, where it says it is okay to lie to infidels to I guess advance Islam, basically.
Okay, I appreciate you weighing in on that. So moving on from there, I just blasted out a URL on the live chat to the Global Terrorism Threat Assessment 2025 from CCS, and this was released March 28th of this year. And there's a ton of really good information in this. And I'm not going to read it verbatim or anything like that. I just wanted to share the resource with people out there. If you like reading and researching stuff, this article here, this assessment is worth your time. But I want to move to something else that
hang on. When you scroll up real quick, I want to point something out for them on the last slide. Can you go back or no?
Yeah, I can. Just give me a second. This one here.
Yeah. Now scroll up a little bit. Is this the guy that wrote it? Is that as far as you can go? Yeah. You see this guy? Is this the guy that wrote it to the right over here? Look what he is, a fellow in warfare, irregular warfare or unconventional warfare. See what this guy's an expert of. And that's what we've been talking about, whether it's them using terrorism or whether they're using cyber warfare. That's all unconventional and irregular warfare. That's all I wanted to point out.
No, and I appreciate that. I was going to mention this when we wrap up, which is not too long. We're almost at the end of this episode. But Mike Glover is a personal friend of mine. He's worked on shows with Jeff and I, like Surviving Man. Before some sniper comes out of the woodwork, he's been completely clear of all accusations made against him. And he's in the process of rebuilding his reputation. He will be with us Wednesday evening for Survival Dispatch News. So it'll be 2 Green Berets, Mike Glover, and Randy, and it'll be 2 CIA guys, because when Mike left the Green Berets, he worked in the CIA like Jeff, and we're going to be discussing unconventional warfare. Randy was the one who brought the topic up, and it's an important topic because this 5th generation warfare doesn't look anything like stuff did in the past.
That's right.
And this particular individual who did write this article, this threat assessment, is a specialist in irregular warfare. But you want to talk irregular warfare, got a couple things I want to throw out there before we get to the conflict question and we wrap up. So Dee Dee, who is one of our very faithful guardians, so when you sign up to be a Survival Dispatch News Guardian, if you're a paying member, you get an invite to our Signal chat. It's insanely busy. There's days where it's a dull roar and there's maybe a few hundred messages, but there's other days I've seen an upwards of 3,000 messages in that chat in one day. And it's kind of like, man, there's no way I can read all of this. But she posted this either earlier today or yesterday, and this is pretty crazy. I did not have time to verify it, but I am going to look into it. So listen to this. So space war, an important event happened 3 days ago. China pulverized a Starlink satellite with a 2-watt laser beam from 36,000 kilometers away. So doing the math in my head, 18 and 3, just under 22,000 miles away. That's less power than a candle. The superpowers need to reach a deal to prevent a wipeout of GPS, cloud, and satellite comms. This is an example of what I call the hot war in cold places. It's cold in space. There are no journalists and no photo ops, but the risks to the human economy are very real. Operating from an altitude of 36,000 kilometers, more than 60 times higher than SpaceX's Starlink network, this Chinese satellite has demonstrated a level of data transmission far superior to what Starlink can offer, pushing the boundaries of what many thought were possible. So
this is a big deal.
Yeah, I'll go to you first, Randy, for comment, then Jeff. But here, I want to just frame this situation for our viewers. We are heavily dependent on satellites for a lot of stuff, especially weapons guidance. The Chinese like to make fun of us by saying that we are so reliant on satellites that if they took out our satellites, we'd become sitting ducks. So, for example, the Ukrainian strikes inside of Russia, they didn't happen from the Ukraine. We had to provide the guidance measures for that to happen. But there have been multiple reports over the course of the past year, maybe even, before then, of us observing Chinese satellites in space wargaming against each other and taking tactical moves, trying to knock out the other satellite. This is, I highly suspect that this report from EP521 is probably accurate. But Jeff, you come from the intel world. Give me your thoughts on satellite warfare and how prescient it was of Donald Trump to form, our space. Yeah, Space Force.
Well, satellite warfare, counter satellite warfare, has been around since as long as there have been satellites. We signed a treaty with the Russians that we would not put offensive weapons in space, meaning you're not going to have a satellite with nukes on it. That said, targeting communication satellites and, more importantly, SIGINT satellites, or like the Cage-11s, the photo optic ones, you assume it's going to happen. In fact, we have satellites that are black in orbit, just sitting around waiting to come back to life if we need them to replace one that's been taken out. Kind of a spare tire satellite floating in space. And they do too. We have war gamed against satellites just like they have. We have actually shot down satellites using an F-15 with a special missile that would go up and shoot a LEO satellite, or low Earth orbit. The fact that they took down a Starlink, not surprising, and that low of a power is not that big a deal either if you think it, because when you communicate, you can communicate with a Starlink with a freaking phone, really, a satellite phone. Right. So it's a low power going up, and that satellite has to take that really, really weak signal and then amplify it so it can do something with it. So if it takes something that's like 0.0001 and then amplifies it, well, what happens if you hit it with something that is a 2 to begin with, and they amplify that and it fries everything? I'm assuming Elon's a smart guy, and I'm assuming he's put limiters and all sorts of stuff in his later versions of the satellite. They may have taken out an early version. And Starlink satellites aren't designed to last forever anyway. That's why they're constantly launching more. They're in low Earth orbit. They have atmospheric drag. They fall out of the sky and burn up on the way in because they're not very big anyway. That is not a big deal to me. It's logical. They've probably done it before, we just haven't noticed. Because Starlink loses satellites all the time, and whether it gets zapped by a Chinese satellite or just drag on the atmosphere, who knows? What you worry about is if they take out a $500 million spy satellite. Those are not easy to replace. Starlink will launch 50 satellites tomorrow. We launch a Cage-11 every few years. They ain't cheap. And the same with our SIGINT and our radar satellites and everything else. Those are expensive, very expensive pieces of equipment. Those are like B-2 bombers in space.
it's interesting you would mention phones being able to connect. So there's been a long-standing rumor that Elon's going to bring out an X phone. It'll be powered by Starlink, and the technology is certainly there. This is a text exchange between John Wheaton and myself yesterday. So John was off the grid on the weekend with his son doing some incredible shooting stuff. Like his 12-year-old son was ringing steel at 1,000 yards. It was pretty badass.
Wow.
And I went to send something to him, and he was trying to upload stuff for last night's episode, and the connection wasn't there, which is why John and Ted, John Martin, we broadcast their episode last night. But if you look closely here, right in the middle, I messaged Satellite yesterday, 9:29 a.m. So I got a message basically saying, John is off the grid, but he is connected by satellite. Would you like to send a message to him? And there was a thing where you could touch it and say yes, and then send the message. So it's just proof for people who haven't seen this, but you can absolutely send text messages or iMessages vis-a-vis satellite stuff. So go ahead.
Just real quick on Starlink. Starlink's low Earth orbit. It may be 60 miles away from you, over your head. All right, so you got to go 60 miles. Yeah, some cell phones will go 60 miles, so it's not that big a deal. But when you talk Inmarsat, those are geosynchronous. Those are 13,000 miles away. And you can still have a phone that you hold in your hand that can talk to them.
Yeah,
the technology out there is amazing, but it requires those satellites to be able to amplify an incredibly weak signal to one that they can use. And that's their Achilles heel, because if you put too much power into that amplifier, you fry it.
Yeah, I appreciate the technical information on that a lot. So before we do the conflicted question, this wasn't in the brief, but I'm going to throw it out there because it's quite bothersome, and I'd like to hear both of your opinions on this. Less than 5% of eligible voters in New York City voted for Ma'am Danny to be the Democrat, representative for the mayoral election next year, or later. Is it later this year? No, it's next year, 2026. Anyway, there's a few things here. We've been saying for years, you got to pay attention to what's going on in Western Europe and other Western countries, because it's a harbinger of things to come here. The mainstream media, the Democrat Party are all making it sound like Ma'am Danny is going to be the mayor of New York no matter what. He's going to be anointed, essentially. And what that has done is it has discouraged people from voting. It's disenfranchised them, because they're like, well, my vote clearly doesn't matter. This guy is a massive fraud. He's not even in our country legally, for crying out loud. So there's a plethora of information out there. I'm going to throw a few things at y'all, and then I'll get your comments. We'll do the conflicted question. We'll wrap up. But he calls himself a socialist for the people, but he's really the privileged son of Hollywood royalty, raised in luxury and handed his career by his famous mother, Queen of Cotway director Mira Nair. Ma'am Danny even faked a South African accent on live radio to seem more authentic. He admitted to playing whatever role people wanted. He's a professionally trained actor. How long have I been saying political theater? This isn't public service, it's political theater. That's quoted right there. He's a scripted Muslim socialist backed by power, pretending to be oppressed while pushing Islamic grievance and Marxist revolution in New York politics. New York City deserves truth, not a hustler in costume. Moving on to the next one here. Don't know if this will lead anywhere, but it looks like Ma'am Danny lied to get approved for U.S. citizenship. He never admitted that he lived in Cairo. Anyway, hoping there's some path to denaturalize and deport him. And there's a bunch of screenshot information there. But moving on to the next one, watch NBC probe Ma'am Danny on all of his fake accents. 49-second video.
Because I think that New Yorkers, more than they hate a politician they disagree with, they hate a politician they can't trust.
On the subject of trust, you've adopted different speaking accents in different scenarios.
But they go to their local bodega.
Is there one that's real and one that's affected?
What I would say is, as any immigrant knows, having been born in Kampala, Uganda, and then raised in South Africa and moving here when I'm 7 years old, is there are different parts of my life.
Worldwide tour is a worldwide tour is a worldwide tour.
Mamdani was talking about a worldwide press tour back when he was a rapper.
Bring the flavor to the fish, bring the flavor to the rice.
In a Disney movie directed by his mother.
Nepotism and hard work goes a long way. Here in New York City, this is how I speak. This is how I am.
Do you believe in the First Amendment, Tom Homan?
Because I think.
So suffice it to say, he's in the running now with Kamala Harris for the most fake accents. This is all fake baloney. People of New York City, get out and vote. I don't even give a crap if you vote for Andrew Cuomo for crying out loud. Don't let this guy be installed, because this is what they did with Khan in London, England. You now have the 37 largest cities in Great Britain have a Muslim mayor born abroad. They do not have to have the majority of citizens in a country to take control of the government. This guy's an actor. He's a total fraud, and he will be installed if people in New York City don't get off their butts, I should say, and actually do something. Jeff, your comments first, then Randy, then the conflicted question.
Well, yeah, they had 10% voter turnout. My sister owns a building in New York, and her daughter lives there. So I was talking to them about it. She goes, 10% voter turnout. There are 2 million Jews who live in New York City. 2 million. He won with 400,000 votes. So if 1/4 of the Jewish population had turned out to vote, he would not have won.
In a primary.
So it's just apathy and laziness. And New York is going to get what it deserves if they elect this moron.
Randy?
Well, I don't know there's much to add to that. I mean, we know this guy's going to be installed. He didn't even get enough votes to truly win, but we've heard all kinds of excuses. One of them I heard was, again, not just disenfranchised voters, but all the younger kids that they've kind of snowed over buying into all this stuff, and then they'll come out and vote for him, and they don't even really know what they're voting for. That could be possible too. I don't know. But what I do know is that he wouldn't win a fair election. So
he had less than 50% of the votes in the Democrat primary, not enough to win. But Andrew Cuomo walked away. This whole thing is straight up theater. It's all theater. Every
he
last
already
bit
conceded to him, right? He conceded to him, right? That's just crazy.
Correct. With less than 5% of the eligible voters in New York City.
I think that speaks volumes that he already conceded with that. It's just ridiculous.
I think he was embarrassed.
Yeah.
Well, this guy will be the Democrat candidate, and God forbid that he gets voted in, because you wouldn't believe some of the stuff he's proposing. He's going to tax white neighborhoods higher than any other neighborhoods. And if you think I'm making that up, he's all over today's news.
Yeah, I saw
very vocally stating that that's what his intentions are. He's going to arrest anybody who comes into his city that supports the deportation of illegals who are not here legally by definition. That the guy is really, he's bad.
And minimum wage at like $30,
$30 an hour minimum wage. Like, he will completely nuke New York City. It will turn into London, England. My wife was in London a few years ago. She walks out of the hotel. She was supposed to turn to the right. It was her first day there. She turned to her left. My wife can look after herself. You guys know, you've met her. But in a matter of a couple blocks, she thought she was in a different world and very promptly went back the other way. So at the end of the day, God forbid this guy gets installed in New York City. Conflicted question of the night. Someone in your group has gear which would be better used in the hands of another member who's more experienced. The owner doesn't want to lend his equipment because modern society has collapsed and his gear is now irreplaceable. To have his gear in the hands of the person most qualified to use it, however, would be a great advantage to your group. As the group's leader, do you force the man to lend his equipment in order to give the entire group an advantage, or do you respect his right to his own private property? Randy, I'll go to you first for your thoughts.
So, now that society collapsed, we all depend on each other. So I think forcing him to do it may leave some sour grapes, so to speak, and that could lead to further problems down the road. I really think the answer to this would be, because one of the things you'll need to do is train, practice, so to speak. I set up some training that would highlight and display, you know what I'm saying, set them both through so he can see himself what the difference looks like. And in the interest of things, it's not like, just because he hands it to another member of the group that we lost that article forever. It still will always be his. But I think going through some training iterations, showing him the difference of him using it and the other person and what a difference that would make should do it.
That's good. That's, Jeff, your thoughts?
I would not force him, because then if I were him, I'd say, well, where does it stop?
Yeah.
Because, okay, I've stored up more food than he did because I prepped, and he doesn't have enough food. So should I give him all of my food because he's a bigger, stronger guy? No. What I would do is I would say, okay, it's yours. Can't be replaced. Understand that. Would you trade for it? Make a deal. Do a trump. Make a bargain. But at the end of the day, if they say it's a rifle, and the guy goes, no, I'm not willing to get rid of my, he's got a really nice, sniper rifle or something like that, and he says, no, I'm not willing to part with that because it's mine. I worked for it. I had the foresight to buy it, and if he needed it, he should have bought one. Now, if he wants to borrow it or something like that, or he wants to barter for it, that's a different story. But I would not force him to, because one, you're going to create a lot of animosity. And the other thing is, it's just, if you take something from someone against their will, that's theft. And that's biblical, thou shalt not steal. So how can you take a moral high ground within your group if you're violating the 10 commandments within your group? So no, I would not make him turn it over.
So I like Taz's suggestion here. If this is the Taz, I think it is. He always comes up with good solutions. Sure, you keep your property, but you're on point. That's interesting.
That's a good solution as well.
Well, that's why I took the approach I did. So maybe we can save his life for a little bit longer. Yeah. Maybe not, though. You never know.
Very first line I had, Jeff, was negotiate something for him, much like yourself. So offer to do some
He's got
sort
a sniper rifle and he can't see beyond the end of his nose. Say, look, we'll trade you your single shot sniper rifle for a multi-shot AR.
Right.
Yeah.
Or a pair of readers. So I agree. I would try to negotiate something with him. And not only negotiate something in some sort of trade, but also for the person who's more skilled, that person would provide training, like Randy said, for a couple of reasons. One, to elevate the guy's game, but also to show him, the level you have to perform at to be truly effective, right? So take, for example, back on Mike Glover. Mike is 10, 11 years younger than I am, and, a Green Beret. If it came down to my gear and me keeping it or having Mike Glover use it, I would give it to Mike Glover, to be quite clear, because he's in a better position to protect our group than I am. But if, let's just say I was being cantankerous and didn't want to do that, I would, follow along your lines, Jeff. What's in it for me? Like, what are you going to give me in return for my gear, and make it voluntary for sure. But good suggestions. And again, we want to hear everybody else's suggestions. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I've got a scope 30-06. I'm not a particularly good long range shot. And if somebody else was, I'd say, here, you take it. But if they said, yeah, I want your AR-15, I'm like, I can shoot that AR just fine for my purposes. No, I'm not giving it to you.
There you go. All right. Well, quick reminder to everybody out there, go to survivaldispatchnews.com, sign up for a free account. You'll get our Saturday watch guide, has links to everything we publish for the week. We started doing that because we know a lot of the platforms, like CommiTube in particular, is not notifying people when we publish content. When I see 0 to 1% of our views coming from notifications, when I see topics that used to get 100, 200, 300,000 views, get a fraction of that, it tells me that we're being suppressed. And we've noticed this for a long time. I've had lots of people reach out to me and say, I never get notifications. So go to survivaldispatchnews.com, sign up for a free account. You'll get our Saturday watch guide. You won't miss any of the content that we publish. Also, just a reminder to show our sponsors some love, CCW Safe and Carnival in particular. They help us defray costs. We don't get an affiliate commission, but they pay us a monthly stipend. So instead of punching a time clock, we can work on bringing you the truth instead. And we put a lot of hours into it, as I'm sure most of you know. CCW Safe, by far the best option for self-defense coverage. If you watch some of our other videos on that topic, I go into depth on it. Carnival, reasonably new guys to us, but they have 100% American meat, grass finished, not just grass fed, no mRNA, no antibiotics. It's super high quality stuff. Randy and I have both had the opportunity to cook it and eat it. It's really, really good. And whether you're a prepper and you want to stack it up for a rainy day, or you just like the convenience of it, it's a great product. Can't say enough good things about them. Use the code EATMEAT, by the way, and you get 10% off on anything from them. If you're in law enforcement, send an email to support@survivaldispatch.com. Let me introduce you to Jeff Nicholas from Compliant Technologies, makes the gloves. It's a huge force multiplier for hands-on policing. I've been hit by it. John got hit by it. He's 6'3", 55 pounds. Yeah.
Not you too, Jeff.
Oh, yeah.
he got hit by Jeff Nicholas himself. So
at Surviving Man.
Oh, man.
And when Jeff, when he rubs my face in something, I have the video. I'm going to pull it out and play it of him getting hit by the gloves.
You're down like a sack of potatoes.
Yeah, same here. So anyway, John will be back. John Wheaton will be back tomorrow night. And then we will be returning Wednesday evening, the three of us, plus Mike Glover, to discuss irregular warfare on Wednesday night. Until then, please like, share, comment, subscribe. Enjoy the closing video. And God bless America.
God bless America.
God bless.
And he carries a stick that will smack and destroy and annihilate any single effort to create a nuclear power in this country that threatens American security.